Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Tuesday everybody. After almost 3 years of economic and social disruption, is China finally dismantling zero COVID and reopening the country? This, of course, is the trillion-dollar question currently being asked, and today's video will be exploring developments and signals on this front, as well as some of the political and economic implications. On the face of it, it does seem like reopening and easing has been accelerated, despite case numbers continuing to rise, a radical departure of past practice of strict lockdowns in response to even a small number of cases. On the afternoon of November 30th, last Wednesday, Guangzhou, also known as Canton in English, took the lead with several districts announcing that they would lift most restrictions and reopen businesses. We covered this at the time. In response, writes one Chinese analyst, people left their homes to watch and celebrate the removal of barriers that had sealed them in. Bars and restaurants reopened, and customers flooded in. It is being reported that new easing measures may be announced as early as tomorrow, Wednesday, which would downgrade the classification of COVID from a Category A of infectious disease to a Category B1, and that less strict management of the disease may be downgraded as soon as January. If this does happen, it would be a huge deal and signal that a rapid easing and opening could happen within a month or so. If this is the case, then the question is why now? Why is the government now pushing so hard for an accelerated timetable for opening up? In early November, Beijing had signaled easing, but this proved to be somewhat of a false start. We remember many localities, after an initial loosening of restrictions, quickly retightened measures once cases began to increase. The timing of this renewed effort to significantly loosen COVID measures, immediately after unprecedented though small-scale protests across the country, including, critically, at leading universities and some of China's wealthiest districts, strongly suggests that this manifestation of public anger and frustration is what pushed Beijing to act now. We have also seen what does appear to be a shift in the messaging from state media over the last several days. Quote, the authorities are working hard to shift the propaganda about COVID to make it appear less threatening. A commentary from Xinhua Monday said that the most difficult period has passed, and now the pathogenicity of the Omicron virus is weakening, and also reminded everyone that the party's policies since the Wuhan outbreak have been correct, scientific, and effective. The commentary did not need to say explicitly that questioning the policy to date or the shift is not acceptable. End quote. And it hasn't just been this article. Almost every major state-run publication has had articles in recent days which appear to be normalizing the idea of getting COVID. Quote, drink plenty of water, don't stay up late at night and eat on time, end quote, writes the 21st Century Business Herald yesterday, adding, quote, COVID is not so scary, end quote. And this report by CCTV over the weekend, quote, Omicron causes fewer severe symptoms than the regular flu, with over 90% of reported cases across the country being either asymptomatic or with very light symptoms, end quote, to give just a few examples. Now, the speed of the policy shift does appear to have caught many by surprise, including local officials themselves. Quote, the seismic shift in policy was abrupt, even catching municipal officials unawares. Caixin has learned that the Guangzhou government was discussing continued efforts to eliminate the virus under zero COVID on the morning of November 30th, but then received a new pandemic directive from provincial authorities. Just hours later, the city announced the end of the lockdowns. End quote. And more cities have followed Guangzhou's lead. On Monday of this week, yesterday, commuters in Beijing and 16 other cities were allowed to board buses and subways without a virus test in the previous 48 hours, for the first time in months. Analysts, domestic and international, are also playing catch-up, but continue to warn that easing, though likely accelerated, won't be overnight. For example, in a note to investors yesterday, Morgan Stanley economists expressed, quote, China is not ready for a fast reopening yet. We expect lingering containment measures, end quote, adding, quote, restrictions could still tighten dramatically in lower-tier cities should hospitalizations surge, end quote. Indeed, this is a real possibility. Beijing may permit high degrees of relative opening in wealthier cities, Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, Wuhan, Chongqing, Chengdu, etc., where hospitals and homes are better resourced, and where middle-class citizens have shown that they are more willing to openly express discontent. However, poorer regions may remain tightly closed. If this happens, we should expect the first major waves of cases to wash through Tier 1 cities and provincial capitals in the short term, and over the medium term, already sizable regional wealth and income disparities to widen. And we already have potential examples of this. State media reports yesterday that the relatively poor eastern province of Anhui continues to tighten control measures despite the loosening we have seen in other major cities. In the provincial capital, Hefei, the municipal government on Sunday expressed that, quote, "At present, the risk of epidemic transmission is rising sharply, and the prevention and control should not be a single step," end quote. Testing, quarantine, and other measures, quote, "can only be increased but not reduced, and the time can only be extended but not shortened," end quote. The real test will come as cases explode in wealthier cities in the coming weeks, which should tell us whether China is really, finally, opening back up. Migration home for Lunar New Year will begin in the next couple of weeks too. The travel of tens of millions will also test the willingness of local officials to relax controls. But if officials do stay the course with reopening, as control measures do relax, China's medical system is preparing for a tough battle, as in the coming months, infections will likely soar. The key constraint on China's medical system is the lack of beds in intensive care units. In 2020, a study by the OECD showed that China has just 3.6 ICU beds for every 100,000 people, compared to 11.1 in Singapore and 25.8 in the United States. Indeed, some experts remain concerned about how 1/5 of humanity with near-zero natural immunity will react to this opening. Quote, "A nationwide outbreak at this point could be dire. If 1/4 of the Chinese population is infected within the first 6 months of the government letting its guard down, a rate consistent with what the United States and Europe experienced with Omicron, China could end up with an estimated 363 million infections, some 620,000 deaths, 32,000 daily admissions to intensive care units, and a potential social and political crisis. 3 punishing years fighting off the coronavirus would have been in vain, leaving China with the worst-case scenario it has struggled so hard to avoid." End quote. We should note that Mr. Huang is no zero-COVID apologist either. Just today, for example, he tweeted, quote, "The most meaningful thing China can and should do in moving away from zero COVID is to eliminate its health code systems, which is no different from slavery in the digital age." End quote. Okay, next up, how has the market responded to all this? Well, rather positively is the answer. Chinese equities have risen and the currency, the yuan, jumped past the 7 per dollar level for the first time since mid-September, with the onshore yuan surging more than 1% to 6.9678 per dollar on Monday. The Hang Seng China Enterprises Index and the CSI 300 Index have both seen positive movements in recent days too. This is off a good November as well. We remember Chinese stocks in Hong Kong surged 29% last month, the best performance since late 2003, while the RMB, the yuan, gained by the most since 2018. China junk dollar notes, dominated by the property sector, rose to an average 65 cents last Friday, the highest level in 3 months. The reason for these positive market signals are clear. Quote, "The loosening of restrictions coupled with a property rescue package has resuscitated Chinese stocks after a $6 trillion rout that culminated in the Communist Party Congress in October. Investors are expected to zero in on longer-term plays such as consumer and healthcare shares as the economy recovers." End quote. Thus, with such a low base too, especially in equity markets, there very much is space for growth for higher risk-tolerant investors. Quote, there are more signs of relaxation of COVID curbs, and the positive factors have not been fully priced in by the market. I expect more funds to continue to hold long positions in the remainder of the month for year-end window dressing purposes. End quote. On Sunday, Morgan Stanley lifted Chinese equities to overweight from an equal weight position it had since January 2021. On Monday, Bank of America Corp has turned positive on the market, and Goldman Sachs now also expects China's stocks to outperform in 2023. In the following weeks, we will find out whether these moves are premature or not. And indeed, some analysts do remain cautious. Quote, while there are positive steps taken, it will take time for China to exit from their zero-COVID policy. In the near term, China's economy continues to face headwinds from the prolonged property market slump, and high COVID infections weigh on consumption recovery. End quote. Hao Hong, chief economist at Grow Investment Group, also writes this week, quote, cases will surge, confusion will grow, and the market will be volatile. End quote. Okay, that is today's episode. I must say, after months of frankly very bad news, it is nice to finally be able to make a video that is mostly optimistic, albeit cautiously optimistic. If you guys enjoyed today's video, don't forget to hit that like button. And as always, anyone who can go that extra mile and help me keep China Update sustainable, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. If you think this sort of channel is useful and has some value and you'd like to help me keep doing it, this is one of the best ways that you can support the channel. Okay, that is today's episode. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Thank you, everybody, for the ongoing support. I will see you all tomorrow.